Good morning, everybody. I'm Eleanor Hawkins with Axios. I write the Axios Communicators newsletter, and we're kicking off Axios in Cannes today. We have a really jam-packed lineup. A lot of the creators, the influencers, the marketers who are behind some of the biggest brands and biggest campaigns. So we're really excited to get things kicked off today. Today, like I said, I cover communications, and a lot of what I see is this push and pull between reputation and relevance. And it's something that all brands are trying to navigate right now in this digital era. And so we're in this moment where marketing, it can kind of, everything you do is in the court of public opinion, if you will. And responsible storytelling is now a key part of business strategy. And so that's something we're going to examine. Our first speaker built a massive following of her own and built her own reputation kind of by anticipating how brands should engage and show up in the cultural conversation. So if you'll please join me in welcoming Robyn Delmonte, the creative director of GirlBossTown's.
Hi everyone, I'm so excited. This is my first thing of Cannes, so I wanted to start it off strong with you guys.
We're kicking it off. For those of you who maybe aren't familiar or aren't on TikTok, I want to just kind of give some background. So you have roughly 700,000 followers on TikTok. You've received close to 100 million likes across the platform. And you refer to yourself as the internet's agent.
Yes, subtle flex and a little self-proclaimed on the internet's agent part, but I wear the title well, and I think my audience agrees with it. So I'm very fortunate in that. But it kind of grew to a place where not only am I speaking about brands and speaking to brands, but that became my brand within itself, which is a very interesting yet powerful position to be in, especially in the current digital landscape, which I love and proudly do every single day.
Yeah, so you kind of built this reputation for saying this brand should collab with this creative, and you're really great at predicting.
Yes, I think the first couple of videos that really went viral were I was actually a little hungover on my couch. I'm not sure if anybody has felt that way before. So I had no filter, and I just started posting these videos on TikTok about brand collabs and how I think celebrities could switch their reputation in the public eye based on the brands that they work with. And it was a series called PR Moves. So I would say, here's a PR move I have for Selena Gomez. I think she should work with this brand and do this to target this audience. You would think speaking about marketing demographics and campaigns on a short format content app like TikTok wouldn't resonate, yet it did the complete opposite. And not only was I getting the brand's attention, but more importantly, their consumers were resonating with me. So I did a little bit of both. I would like to say it was part of a strategy. I didn't necessarily think about it like that going into it, but now being able to tap into that strategy is extremely powerful.
Well, and you sit in this interesting position because you're over here like kind of offering commentary on brand partnerships while also kind of building up your own brand.
Yeah, and they're very different, especially I do a lot of creative consulting and work with brands, especially when it comes to trend forecasting and predicting. Some people think I'm psychic. I just think I like to use my phone a lot. But the things that I would predict and tell brands to do with their platform are things that I first tried to do within my brand, and I recognize that every brand's story is very different, and if I'm going to try to replicate things that work for bigger brands when I'm coming from such a personal place on my platform, the two things might not coexist and work the same. But that's why I think it's so important to understand your audience and know that one thing that might work for one brand might not work for me. And figuring that out was a process, but something now I utilize within my consulting.
You said something that I want to touch on, which is around this concept of personalization, really going niche and figuring out how to tap into passion points of different audiences. So share more what you're seeing when it comes to micro influencers and kind of this like community building effort we're seeing brands engage with.
Definitely. My favorite question is when I'm on a panel and people will be like, so how do you find your niche? I'm like, if you have to search for your niche, it's not your niche. I feel like that's a little bit of a contradicting statement. So I feel like when these micro creators fall into niche, or as Gen Z calls it, internet lore, watching brands be able to tap into that and replicate it in a formula that becomes a big campaign and turn something that's so niche into something that's mainstream is my favorite thing that I see brands do. For example, Gap recently created a hoodie that hoodied because they found a micro creator who her entire content was just trying on hoodies and finding which one hoodied the best. And Gap worked with her to design their newest hoodie and utilized her niche audience and put it on a mainstream platform like a legacy brand like Gap, and they did it so seamlessly, which is exactly what I think other brands should be doing. But to find those niches and to find those micro creators to work with as a brand, you need to be a consumer of their internet to do so.
There's also this push and pull, like we said, between working with these creators who maybe have their own presence on social media, maybe their own baggage on social media. And we often find that creators want to be involved, but they also want more leeway.
Yes.
So in your conversations, both with creators and influencers and brands, how are you seeing them navigate this dynamic of, we want your partnership, but we want you to do it our way?
Yeah, I always say I feel like legal is everybody's worst ex-boyfriend, because you'll get into a new relationship with a brand and then legal will show up and be like, you can't do that. And you're like, why? However, I feel like as the current digital landscape has progressed and we have case studies of brands doing things that they might not normally be able to do in the past because of a legal situation or because of their old branding, we can now use those to show these current brands and influencers stepping a little bit outside of your comfort zone. Even though it might be a little uncomfortable, the benefits will be massive. And I think that that's what we need to be seeing more brands do. And I have seen brands do that, but I also think as a creator and as an influencer on the other end of things, you have to recognize that they are putting themselves in a risk position to do so. So making it more of a relationship versus a partnership in the sense of being able to really bounce ideas off of each other, listen, and find something that works cohesively, I think is the most important part.
And it's also about understanding your audience, your consumer base, right? And maybe finding that Venn diagram of the consumers you're trying to reach and the folks that these influencers reach, and tapping into that.
I always say the internet is like the world's biggest inside joke. And in elementary school, you would have one girl who wasn't in the group try to be in the inside joke, and it made it even more awkward. And it's almost like you shouldn't even try to be in the inside joke. It almost puts you in a worse position. And I feel like that's sometimes what brands do. They'll try to be in on it, be in on the internet's inside joke. And when you can tell they don't understand it or they're doing it from a place that doesn't resonate, it does more harm than good.
So, an example of that?
I think that sometimes when I'm working with brands or I see scripts, I think that might be the biggest example of that, because I'll see they saw something that was trendy, like demure, but that was trendy a month ago, and they want me to use it in my script because they're like, oh, that demure thing worked. It's like, yeah, but that worked a month ago, and if I was to come on here, my audience would know that's not how I speak, or that's an old trend, but the brand and people who don't necessarily consume internet as much as the consumer wouldn't.
You bring up a really good point about timeliness, too.
Yes.
Are marketers from big brands working fast enough?
I always say when I'm consulting and working with larger brands that there's a time to spend money and to not be timely and do things that are timeless, that'll resonate with an audience. And then there's things that you can do for almost no money or budget to tap into trends that are currently happening, because a lot of these trends that are currently happening are being set and presented by people who are at home doing it from their couch, doing it with a green screen. So I think that there is a time and a place to hop on a trend, but then there's also a time and the place to start the trend yourself and do things that can create legacy and be timeless in the end.
What have you seen when it comes to user-generated content, right? So you mentioned people on their phones kind of uploading, creating their own, using the green screen in a really effective way. Have you seen brands tap into that user-generated content in an effective way?
I think so. I feel like Ryanair, the airline over here that is known for being a little more on the cost-effective side, and people kind of complain about them a little bit. They've tapped into that type of content to almost become their own critic, like the internet is, in a way that makes fun of themselves, but makes themselves be self-aware. And I think that works, and I love seeing brands do that.
Self-deprecating.
Exactly, yeah.
Do celebrities matter anymore? Do they still have influence and sway?
I think so. See, I'm kind of old school with that. I mean, I just turned 31. But I think that celebrities do hold relevance, especially when it comes to the connection they have with their audience. I feel like it matters less about status more, but in in general, being a celebrity is being somebody that people look up to, want to follow, and want to know. So if that celebrity has a relationship with their audience and their fans, I think it is extremely important. So, I mean, look at Taylor Swift. Look at the relationship she has with her fans and the things that she does. So I still think it matters.
What about athletes? It seems like sports is really bringing audiences together. Every brand wants to partner with every athlete. F1 is a big deal.
Yeah.
We're seeing women's sports on the rise.
Massive.
What are you seeing in the sport marketing space?
So I grew up a little outside of Boston. My dad has a Red Sox tattoo, 2 of them. So sports means a lot to me. So I love this because I always think that sports, I tell my friends who aren't into it, I'm like, sports is like Bravo and pop culture, but like with more legacy. Like just dive into it. You'll be able to do it. And when brands are doing it right, I think it's so great. And I love that a lot of brands are working with female sports. I grew up an athlete myself and was an athlete in college. However, I will say, just because it's popular doesn't mean it necessarily makes sense for every brand. I have seen a little bit of oversaturation, and I almost don't like that word because I feel like there can't really be oversaturation when things are done right in the female sports space. So I think that it's amazing that people are doing it, but it needs to make sense.
I also want to zoom in on just some cultural touch points that are taking place now.
Yeah.
What are some of the trends that you are paying attention to?
Well, I'm not just saying this because this is the type of content that I make, but the example I gave earlier with the Gap hoodie, that hoodies, I think brands, and J. Crew is another great example. Olympia, their creative director, she is in a massive position as a creative director, yet she curates her own personal social media and J. Crew social media to be in a way that lifts the curtain and shows the design process and shows the references and makes consumers more excited about the process of the drop than the drop itself, which I think is the best kind of marketing currently with things dropping every single day. So I feel like the trend of really using creators as creatives is my favorite and what we should be seeing more of.
That's also really interesting because what you say kind of about taking folks behind the scenes, that also can create a sense of corporate storytelling.
100%.
So talk to me about how you balance like brand marketing and corporate storytelling, and then where do the company spokespeople come into play?
I feel like the company's spokespeople come into play when it's kind of like I grew up going to sleepaway camp, and I feel like I've done so many icebreakers my whole life, and you need to get to know somebody before you can speak from their point of view and storytell from their point of view. So I feel like a lot of the times in the beginning, there's a lot of creative process, but what's the most important is for the brand spokespeople and for you to align from the start. So I feel like coming in earlier rather than later in the process, which I've also seen, makes a more cohesive relationship and makes things flow better. But then I also think that like it is the most important for them to speak up and be honest on a consistent level. Because at the beginning, you can say, oh my God, we want you to be creative, do whatever you want. But then after 6 drafts to come in and say, this isn't actually what we wanted, I think that's where things get a little complicated. So there needs to be a cohesive relationship and really set a foundation in the beginning of your relationship with that brand and knowing the story that they want to tell and how you can help amplify that.
One of the things that I cover a lot in my reporting is how CEOs are becoming much more digital, if you will. We're seeing like Daniel Ek from Spotify do a lot of vertical videos talking about earnings or his own personal experiences at concerts. We're seeing the same with David Risher from Lyft. Like, do you think there is a world where that sort of content lands?
100%. And I also think that right now, audiences are so critical. The second they swipe a video, they can tell it's an ad. They can tell they're being persuaded, which is hard from a marketing perspective because that's all that marketing is. But to see the face of the company be vulnerable and put themselves out there and to be able to resonate with them and have a relationship with them, even if it is parasocial or digital, I think that speaks volumes. And at least they're trying. Like, not even in the way that where it's like, oh, like this isn't good, but like at least they're trying. But they understand that to be in digital and to be in marketing, you have to have a social media presence. Sometimes I'd meet with brands, they spend X amount of money on budget, but none of the people in the room even had TikTok on their phone. So it's like, how can you understand your audience when you're not even your audience?
I also want to kind of take it offline, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot happen on TikTok, across social, across LinkedIn, but we're also seeing more and more activations and in-person experiences. What are some trends that you're noticing there and who's showing up physically in a really effective way?
I think Rode is a really good example of this. They did a Rode vending machine with a photo booth at popular activations like Coachella, Stagecoach, Miami Fashion Week, and I think that being in person for a lot of these digital brands is so important. First and foremost, because like we didn't leave the house for a while and we're all learning to be social again. So when we do get invited to something cool, we're like, okay, finally we can leave the house. But also because a lot of these products people don't see in person anymore. So I feel like not only getting FaceTime with the brand, but getting FaceTime with the product, especially if it's something that always sells out or it's only online, is so important and creates organic content just from people going to those types of events. And I see more and more that those are the things that people are talking about from a marketing perspective versus just like a traditional campaign.
Yeah, like a traditional ad.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, we're getting close on time. We always end our conversations on one fun thing. And you've been doing a lot of work with e-news. And you were here for the film festival a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Talk to us about that experience and maybe some like highlights, interesting interviews.
Yeah, I mean, going to the Cannes Film Festival as a girl from Nashua, New Hampshire was always a dream, but I didn't think it was possible. So even being here during that energy and that rush was amazing, but I was working a lot of the time, which I love, I'm a workhorse, but I got to interview Charlie XCX, who is having a massive social moment, and she was working with the brand Magnum, and Magnum had worked with a designer in the 90s, Vivienne Westwood, and had all of the models during the runway eat the Magnum bars, and it became such a big fashion moment. And we were waiting for Charlie to interview her for so long. I was getting so nervous, and I was like, okay, like, what is happening? They're like, it's mobbed outside, she can't get inside. And it was because she created a paparazzi moment eating the Magnum chocolate bar, just walking from her hotel to the event. The streets were mobbed. It was all over social media. So even though it took a while for her to get to the interview, just from the time that she walked out of her hotel to the time I interviewed her, she created a viral campaign moment within itself. And I was like, that is good marketing. And that inspired me. But it was very, very cool.
It's good for Magnum too.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, well, Robyn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We're going to welcome Nick Johnson, Axios publisher, to the stage next.
Thank you.